Bridget. She made me chuckle when I read it. She said, navigating the Great Reshuffle has been like using MapQuest paper directions instead of Waze. So I feel you on that, Bridget. I am Hakimia Jackson, executive coach, DEI board advisor, and I am your ThinkHuman moderator today. I'm excited to be here with you today. So what started off as the Great Resignation with millions of workers leaving the workplace has now morphed into the Great Reshuffle, where millions of people are taking ownership of their growth path in search of more fulfilling roles with the right compensation and the workplace that is better suited for their values and life choices, along with pay and compensation benefits, flexibility, human-centered cultures, and DEI practices. They're increasingly becoming the differentiating factor in the workplace. Leaders must be focused on cultivating thriving cultures of internal mobility, prioritizing personalized continuous learning, and delivering robust benefits to support their workers. According to a recent Microsoft study, specifically the Microsoft 2021 Work Trend Index, a survey conveying more than 30,000 people in 31 countries, over 2/5 of people are considering leaving their employer for more of a fulfilling and flexible opportunity. So from the words of Jennifer Shabby from LinkedIn, the contract between employees and employers is being rewritten. My question to each of you here today, how are you rewriting yours? And if you don't know, guess what? You will learn today. You are in the right place with our amazing thought leaders here today. So please help me show them some love, starting with Chris Elliott. Please come up to the screen. SVP of Sales of BizLibrary. Karen Weeks, SVP of People of Order Groove. Kavita Vora, Chief People Officer at BrainPop. And Zara Chaudhary, please excuse my humanity, Global DEI Strategist and Trainer of PowerToFly. So welcome, thought leaders. Starting with the first question, many companies are now rethinking, how do I incentivize employees and how do I retain the existing employees? What are some of the gaps that are currently existing that's causing this great reshuffle?
Hi, everybody. I think part of it is not knowing what's important to your team and what they actually care about, and then communicating what you are offering today. I think a lot of times we think about employment branding for candidates, and we need to do that internally as well. Do we have the right perks, benefits, culture, environment, community for our team? Have we heard that feedback? Have we taken it in? And then hopefully we have. And then how are we actually branding and talking about it so that they understand what is available for them? Sometimes the most painful piece for me is when I hear that someone's leaving because they had X opportunity or X thing was important to them. And either I didn't know or I knew and we have it and they didn't know that we were able to help them with that. So that's a piece that I really think about a lot.
Building off of what Karen was just saying, I think that's spot on. I think it really is having a deep understanding of what your folks need, but it's also building an environment safe enough where people feel like they can actually voice those concerns. And so I think it's both, it's knowing, but it's also building this safe environment where people really can raise their concerns, having those conversation spaces, making those opportunities so that folks can continue to share their concerns and really give feedback to leadership.
I think in the last couple of years, people have seen that they've had a lot of time to think and reflect. And in that time, they've realized they want to work to live, but not live to work. And so now as the world is going back to normal, whatever the new normal is, they're not agreeing to go back to that old normal. So they want more flexibility and empowerment because they've seen they can get the job done in a different way.
I would add with what Karen shared, nothing hurts more than when you lose phenomenal talent externally for a fit that could have been found internally within an organization. And I think historically, there's been far too much focus on just where is that employee today and how do we upskill within that role. every role has a shelf life. And I think one big gap that's out there right now is that realization that we have to be proactive in looking ahead for our employees, because if you're not doing it internally, they'll look for that opportunity outside the existing organization.
Well said. And I don't know if you all caught on to those mic drop moments, but I have to bring that out, each and every one of you. Karen started off with the knowing, and Zara, expanded that to the building of just that safe space, that psychological safety. But Kavita, you're getting some comments there with your comment on, working to live and not living to work. And Chris, then you said every role has a shelf life. I think that's powerful. Why is it important that we address these gaps to meet the moment?
I think the moment is happening whether we like it or not. So we have to, right? People are looking, they're thinking about what they want, where they want to work. Do they want to stay at their current company? Do they want to even just change careers? It might not even be about going to a competitor, but just what do they want to do with their life? So I think it's important to address it because it's happening. And I do think if there's more communication around the company's mission, vision, purpose, and employees can find that personal connection to it, that can really help. That can be a real, true motivator, even more powerful than, obviously compensation and other things are important, but the idea that every day you go to work for something that you're passionate about and that's bigger than yourself can be a huge motivator right now.
I'd love to build on that, because I think what you just said is really important, is that yes, compensation, of course, is important in the sense of if I feel like I'm fairly paid or I'm valued and I don't see too big of a gap, I will make the decision to stay or talk to my manager or find the right place for me at my current company if I feel like my work is being valued, if I feel connected to something. And I also feel like the company cares about me. So we're a team of about 100 people. We're hiring a bunch. We've had a lot of people stay because of the team and because of the support we gave them over the last couple of years. And we've had people accept our offers that might not have been the biggest cash offers, but they were excited about what we were doing. They saw that there was a real opportunity there. And it was interesting. Someone mentioned in the chat about, people are trying to understand what culture means in this new world.
Yes.
As someone who interviews a lot, I get a lot of really deep, tough questions about how have we handled things? How do we approach things? What does the future look like? Because they now understand what culture means versus, oh, you've got ping pong and free beer and like happy hours. Yay. There's so much more to it these days.
I was going to build off of what Karen was just saying. I think it is so key. And I've been seeing some comments in the chat as well, that connection piece. So really making sure what does culture look like in a remote environment. I also think like building off of what Karen was just saying, the folks realize that they don't have to settle or compromise the way that they may have been in the past. And I think that's been a big realization for a lot of folks, in that I don't need to compromise this. Maybe I do want to work remote, and maybe I want to move to a company that's offering me that flexibility. So it's forcing companies to really take a hard look at themselves and what they're offering their folks, and really reevaluating where are the gaps that may be existing and how can they really restructure or meet those needs that they may not have even thought about before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought kind of a wow moment with Kavita. It's happening whether you like it or not. And I think on the whole, it's driving a lot of great symmetry between the employer-employee relationship. So it's happening. And if your candidates look anything like ours, you can get an offer with any number you want on. Comp is important, but without the context of meaningful relationships, you will lose your best talent or not attract the talent you want. And so getting in sync with this wave is the only way if you really want to make true trusting relationships with your employees.
Zara, I want to expand upon what you said about, employees are realizing they don't have to settle or compromise anymore. How did they get to this point, right? I feel like I realized that, but for some people they had other things, other moving parts. But what have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the times, especially in like the previous, corporate culture, folks were told they can't necessarily bring their whole selves to work, or they'll have to like leave certain parts of themselves behind. And I think now there's such a large shift towards folks may have individually been realizing things, but now as a culture, it's
Yes.
shifting because it's larger conversations that are happening
Correct.
around this. So people no longer feel anxious bringing this up because they know that other folks are bringing this up as well. So it's almost like this collective shift that's happening that for some folks, like you just mentioned, you had that realization a while ago, but for some folks, they didn't feel safe enough to voice it, or, you know, there was a sort of a quiet, like you can't voice this,
Yes.
you know, like you shouldn't be voicing this. And I think a lot of that is going out the window. People are realizing, nope, I can and should be asking these questions for my own sanity, for my own health. You know, we know when folks are not happy in their job, it's having real effects on their health. And so people are now standing up and advocating for themselves as they should be.
Yeah. And using their collective intelligence to actually push the movement forward, whatever that
Absolutely.
is. But Karen, I see you shaking your head, so I want to pull you in there. So it's something that you connect with.
Well, it was interesting too, because I know while we always try to have a culture of authenticity, there's just a natural piece of I go into my transition into work when I walk into the office, and whether I choose to, I don't feel like it's safe to, or for whatever reason, I leave part of myself at home. That's gone now, at least for those of us that are staying remote. Like, this is my room. I know you only see a quarter of it, but I can guarantee my cat is going to walk through because it's almost lunchtime here in New York and there's nothing I can do about it. Or so I think companies that leaned into that. So personally, we did things like, especially in the beginning, like, what is the most creative desk setup you've had to do? This was at the beginning of the pandemic, and we celebrated that and actually did like a fun contest for it. I don't know anything else about their organization, but T-Mobile did a great thing around, they literally onboarded the kids of their employees and they got little ID badges and everything so they could say, oh, my colleague just walked into the room when their kids interrupted them. So I think companies that came up with creative solutions to say, I see you, I know this is all one thing right now, that helps people feel safer to be more of themselves, because we kind of had to, because you're in my bedroom right now, literally.
Yeah, and I seen in the chat, I wanted to pull that out to that whole connection piece. That I was reading an article and it was talking about not only is this the age of the Great Reshuffle, but this is also the age of the Great Reconnection. And we think about just connecting virtually in this era, like the importance of it. What are your thoughts there, as you know, connection being vital to the organization's culture?
One of the series that we produced at BizLibrary, one of our experts talked about the critical importance of trust, and that's not new. But what is new is how much of our time is remote, and in many instances, 100% of that time is remote. And one of the key things that we talk about in building trustful relationships is vulnerability and authenticity. And I think just like Karen was sharing, in being comfortable that, yeah, my animal or my kids may walk through the Zoom, and having at an organizational level, leaning in and embracing that, not how quickly can we get you back into the office, is so key in creating psychological safety for your team, that's okay. And that we're all living kind of in this setting together, and bring that. And like Zara shared, in some ways, maybe even pushing it forward by asking who can have the best example. You know, I've gone a little crazy with my background here as a 1980s movies fan, but that's me. It's what I love, and I can bring that forward and feel very comfortable doing it because of what we've set up with our culture internally.
Yeah, I would add to that, Chris. I love that. And I've seen when leaders are the ones that are transparent and vulnerable can really make a huge impact in the conversation at the company that allows other employees to feel comfortable too. So one example, my CEO shared, I think early on in the pandemic, that he has a long commute. So he's like, now that I'm working from home for the first time in years, I get to have dinner with my kids. Like he would always come home after they already had dinner after school. So and so as we talked about returning to the office, not to work, he was like, I don't want to give this up. I want to have dinner with my kids. So we ended up choosing a remote first hybrid approach. But I think having him share, like, even how it personally meant to him to spend more time with his family, made everyone else more comfortable to share those types of stories as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, +1 to leaders and managers being a part of this. This is not an HR thing. Like, we can help, but it has to be them that are creating the space to have those conversations, create the trust, share their own vulnerability. We can help guide them and coach them and help create some of the frameworks, but it's got to be the leaders and managers that are actually having those conversations with their team and role modeling that.
Yeah. How do we get more leaders to buy in on this? I mean, we hear it all the time. Leaders have to model this, but it obviously, we got community questions where people are asking, like, how do I get leader buy-in to execute on a mindset shift and a culture shift and reestablish or create some new norms within the organization?
I'm happy to chime in here. So I think it's also making the space to get that feedback from folks, because I think sometimes it's hard to get leadership buy-in if you can't actually say, hey, this is what your employees are saying. So it's creating a space, whether it's a survey or it's a conversation opt-in space, that folks can actually attend and voice their concerns so that people can hear directly from their employees. Because I think sometimes there may be a disconnect that happens between leadership and how other employees are really experiencing working at the company. So it is also about how are we getting that opportunity to hear directly from folks, what is your staff saying, and how can you then meet their needs? Sometimes that's what it takes for leaders to, it's almost like a light bulb moment. Like, oh, I didn't realize that was happening here. I thought that may only be happening at other companies. So again, building that space to actually hear directly from folks and bring that to leader, I've seen that actually cause a lot of leadership buy-in. So that's definitely one way that I've seen is effective.
I think leaders are, I think leaders are human too, right? Just like everybody else. So they like positive reinforcement as well. So something I've seen work is when there are those moments of vulnerability or listening or adjusting based on feedback, to just share back, to say, I heard from employees that really resonated with them. They appreciated that. They feel like you really listened. And it just motivates them to kind of keep their ears a little more open the next time as well.
Spot on, Kavita.
We're often, go ahead, Karen.
Nope, go ahead.
So we're often working with our clients very specifically around upskilling and reskilling. And when it comes to the buy-in, I'd say this is a common pitfall that I see when it comes to setting the right expectations. The first would be that this is not an event. I think all too often these strategies get seen as a short-term or one-time effort, and they are not. When done correctly, they are continuous. It's a journey, so it will evolve, but it's not a one-time effort. And the other expectation piece that I see is that it's for some. Hey, we're going to do this for our managers. Right. We're gonna do this for senior leaders and see how it goes. And I can share, it almost never works out. It is for everyone, and setting the right expectations that some results will be quick, but some take a while to come to fruition, but they won't come to fruition if you don't commit to the process.
I just wanted to quickly add on, Chris, something you said just reminded me. I think it's also, I always tell companies, there's no reason why you can't pilot things, right? Having a pilot program, because I think the other way to get leadership buy-in is to actually be able to show, here's the impact that we've had from this pilot program that we did, because no one really says no to a pilot program, and you can actually show what the impact is and then say, I actually think this is an area we need to focus on. And so that's definitely another recommendation I would make to folks. Think about what are the gaps, create a pilot program, start tracking the impact of it, and be able to share that data back.
Right.
There's a lot of conversation around sort of HR leaders thinking more like product leaders or being more agile. And that ties exactly to what you were saying. If you were going to try a new product, you'd get some user feedback, you'd create an MVP, you'd put it out there, you got some feedback, you'd adjust. And I think that's a way we can be performing as well. And I think really helping the managers where they are too. So when I think about the different managers in my organization, they all need different coaching. They all need different support. They talk, what they care about is different than someone else. And so think about how can I help each of them do it best with their team, so it's authentic to them, but I'm also hitting either a pain point or helping support something they care about. And so it means something to them versus a blanket statement to the organization.
Correct, Karen. You're actually leading to my next question, which is, and I know you talked about coaching, but what are some of the other motivators that employees are looking for, throughout this Great Reshuffle?
think knowing that their company, so again, we're small. So I also want to recognize that sometimes things that we can do at 100 plus people is very different than like 5,000 people. But I think knowing that their company is listening and trying their best. I think they recognize we're not going to be perfect and that's okay. But going back to what Zara was just saying, are we trying something? Are we listening? Are we trying to adjust and be better? And are we trying things that we think, that we're hearing from them? And one thing that's really interesting too is what has been the case in the past is not the case anymore. Even things like 401k matches, as a small company at our stage, we never would have considered that before. But people who we are competing with for some great talent are doing that much earlier, or fully paid benefits because people just went through a pandemic. So benefits, they now get the value of that. So really understanding both what is happening in the space, but then what also feels right for you and your team, because they're going deeper into some of those places that I never would have considered at an earlier stage company before.
Mm-hmm.
I would also, go ahead, Chris.
Real quick, one thing I would add that I think the expectation has changed. In the absence of information, people assume the worst. I think the speed of expectation, again, like it or not, it's here, has increased in a virtual world. So just to kind of complement what Karen was sharing, if you're listening, the speed at which you're reporting back has to increase. You won't get the same results if you do a survey and it's months before your employees ever hear how did that go. So I would encourage you to marry the speed of communication back with the programs that you're putting in place to install listening, be it surveys, coffee talks, or otherwise.
100%, Chris. That's like one of the top things we hear from a lot of the companies we partner with is folks wanting transparency from leadership, wanting updates, wanting to know what happened after certain things, like certain information is collected. And so that's like totally spot on. What is our feedback loop? What is our communication structure that we're able to relay this information back to folks? I think that's really crucial. And what I was also going to chime in earlier on is one, understanding that what you may think that your folks need may not actually be what your folks need. So making sure that you're having conversations to actually find out what do your employees want from their job, from this company. And the other thing also is professional growth opportunities and really focusing on that and recognizing that that's not the same for every person. Some folks do want to move up in positions, but we've also seen, again, with this pandemic, people have realized that perhaps, moving up in a hierarchy is not necessarily what they want, but they want to still be able to grow, whether it's laterally or grow within their role. So how are we really approaching professional development and growth opportunities in a different way, where it's not just moving people up in roles, but it's really thinking strategically about what someone wants to grow in and building, personalizing the approach that way.
Yes, that personalizing the approach is very important. Kavita, I've seen you shaking your head, but before you respond to her, I wanted, Zara, when you were talking, it made me think of Elon Musk. He has a quote that says, I always take the position that I am some degree wrong. And my goal is to be less wrong over time. So exercising that ferocious curiosity, hearing from your talent and getting the data that you need to create this transformative workplace. But go ahead, Kavita, to add in on that.
Yeah, Zara, I definitely resonate with the personalization side of it, of everybody wants to feel that we're really listening to them individually, not just as a collective, right? Not just you're an employee, you're a manager, you're in this location, but actually you as a human and want to feel heard. Yes. And so whether it's things like learning and development programs, career pathing, even how they want to give and receive feedback, like all of those things, they really want it to be personalized. And so I think it does require upskilling managers to understand, like there are higher demands on managers now of learning what everybody wants, being flexible, trying to meet people where they are. And it doesn't always come naturally to everyone. So putting in those manager training programs, and even manager training you might have had a couple of years ago may not be effective anymore because the world has changed and expectations have changed around things like making sure there's not bias and making sure employees feel connected in a remote environment. So yeah, the personalization part is very near and dear to my heart.
Yeah. I want to pull in some of these comments here from the community. Susan says, for managers and leaders who are hesitant, we've been shifting metrics to outputs rather than assessing performance by more traditional methods. So thank you so much for sharing some of your key tips. And Carolyn says horizontal and vertical career pathing is what they do within their organization. So please continue to keep the questions and comments going. We really do thank you for your engagement. So with that, I do have another question. So how is specifically, you talked about that personal learning path, Zara and Kavita. But how important is that upskilling and reskilling? What have you heard? What works and what doesn't work? Because traditionally, hey, we have one training and it works for everyone. But now with the people that may want the personalized, learning path, that's what they want. But what about the people who don't know what they want? They're not sure. They need guidance. What do you say to them?
I would love to take this one. Go for it, Kavita.
Yeah.
I said this is certainly the world we get to play in every day. I'm super passionate about it. I always share job roles don't work at your company. People work at your company.
I love that.
Yeah, I think far too often as practitioners, we optimize around roles on paper. And I always give the same bad analogy. But right here at my organization, I have account executives who work here for 6 years. I have others who've worked here for 6 months. It's the same role on paper. Their needs are wildly different as individuals. And one of the themes that came through earlier is like, you don't own this solely within HR or L&D. You need help in putting that onus on managers to really take the infrastructure that you're putting in place and run with it, to take a structure and then start to curate it for their individual team members. I think there's technology that can help you with that. Certainly, we'd love to talk to you about ours, but there's people that can help you with that. And they reside outside of HR and L&D. They reside with your frontline management team. So I think getting a structure in place, but recognizing that structure as it stands is not good enough, right? The final piece is really curating it at an individual level for each learner. Sorry, Kavita, run with it.
No, that was great. I agree. I would just add, things are changing so quickly. So something we implemented that I'm sure many other companies have is stay interviews. And that's been a great way for us to learn what employees are really thinking right now, of like, what do they want? What's working for them? In an ideal world, if there's one thing that could be better, what would it be? And I've been at companies where HR has conducted them or the manager, but I think it's so powerful when the manager conducts them if there's enough trust and foundation already there, because then a manager really gets to hear for themselves. What does the employee want in terms of learning, career pathing, growing? And so, yeah, that is something I would definitely encourage everyone to do, especially during the Great Reshuffle.
It's also a great place for leaders to do skip levels. Again, their trust has to be there, but that's also a great place to get additional feedback from for the leaders too. We've also done a lot of work with different coaches. So we help people pair up depending on their level and depending on what they're looking for with more coaching, so that for the folks who don't know exactly what they want to do next or aren't sure what's important to them, or they've had new revelations and kind of don't know what to do with it, they have a third party objective partner to work through that. And so that's a place that we've done more investing in over the last few years than we had in the past.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in and say something that we're really big on at PowerToFly is recognizing that people are in different levels of their journey, different places of their journey. So we focus a lot on DEI work. Obviously, I'm on the DEI team. And so thinking about like, how do we actually engage folks at the levels that they're at? And it's the same thing when it comes to coaching and professional development and kind of determining where folks want to be. You can't make a one size fits all approach for folks. And so it's really thinking strategically about what are all the different opportunities and the different types of opportunities we're building for folks. So it's not just here's a mentorship program for everyone in the company, but it's really figuring out, okay, these individuals may need a mentorship program. These folks may want more consistent listening spaces every month to be able to connect with one another and further their thinking or whatever it may be, but actually really strategically thinking about personalizing approaches and offering a multitude of opportunities and not just building out one structure. And that is going to have more impact for folks.
Zara, I have a question for you. Well, actually, all the panelists. How have we seen DEI evolve during this Great Reshuffle?
I am very passionate about this question, so I'll kick us off, and please, other folks chime in. But
yes.
I think what people are realizing, thankfully, a lot of companies realizing is DEI does not live in a separate component in HR. DEI is actually company-wide, and it impacts every part of your company, because really what we're looking at, and someone named this earlier, but building that culture of belonging. We want employees to feel valued, seen, heard, feel psychologically safe. And there's so many different things that play into that. It's not just salary. It's not just trust, right? There's all these different pieces. So it really is reevaluating the way that your workplace culture is and questioning parts of it. So we have seen a huge shift in companies realizing that they need help, they need support. So depending on what companies need, we offer different types of personalized services to kind of meet those needs. And again, that's where that personalization comes in, because people are realizing, again, like DEI is not a one size fits all strategy. It can't be. And so again, it's figuring out where are the gaps that exist in your company and who can kind of support you in meeting those gaps, and just lots of new awareness happening. But so I'll leave it there, but I'd love to hear what other folks have to say too.
This is another place where actually upskilling managers is something that we've been trying to focus on, whether that is through because they're interviewing, whether that's creating the safe space to have conversations with folks, all of the things. But this is one place where I definitely feel like upskilling our managers has been a priority. I've done manager training 10 years ago where the training was very, very different than what is providing today. Even things as simple as like just asking them how their weekend was. And it's okay to ask about their personal life, because it used to be, oh no, that's the line, don't cross it. And we've just totally removed that. And so I think managers either grew up with those managers in place and don't know what new managers should look like, or they are managers who have been managers for a while and are trying to go through this transformation themselves. So that's been one area that we've been trying to help managers with.
One of the things I would share, and I would kind of continue to reiterate, I don't think it's new. I just think it becomes more accentuated in this reshuffle. I'll give a micro example where I think kind of DI is once again even more reinforced in a particularly remote world, is expression of a range of emotions. If you really want to be authentic with your employee base, we're all human and we all have a wide range, and that range is not specific to a gender or race or anything else that we could put in there, and making sure that all employees feel when appropriate to share across. And I shared in our practice session with the panel here on Valentine's, I wrote a poem for my wife and I put myself out there. I actually put the whole thing on LinkedIn. It was a side of me that was a little quirky and silly, but certainly a side that my employees typically don't see on a daily basis. And that's okay, again, to be your authentic self and have a range of emotions that spans kind of the entire spectrum.
Thank you so much for sharing, Chris.
It's still there if you want to check it out.
Yeah, Brianna says, love that.
Chris. I'll just add, I think it's definitely a must-have now. I mean, I think it always was, but maybe not every leader realized that. But making sure your DEI strategy, people strategy, company strategy are all integrated is a non-negotiable. One other tip I'll add is just making sure that if you do have a DEI committee, that they feel that safe in having a direct line of communication to the executive team, including the CEO. So while it's great as HR leaders that we partner with DEI, there's also got to be that direct line of communication that they have as well, where they feel empowered to share feedback, ask questions, just maybe be a voice for other employees that don't feel safe and comfortable to speak up.
I was just going to say also, and I know someone put this in the chat as well, being really mindful of not being performative, because I think a lot of times with DEI work, it ends up being performative. But I think now you'll get pushback from employees when they realize that leadership is just being performative, they'll go elsewhere. So again, it's forcing leadership to actually be authentic in their allyship and in their DEI work, and their strategy is much more intentional than it may have been in the past, because people are realizing performative allyship, performative DEI work, it's not going to keep people and it's not going to have them be happy. So I just wanted to also name that it's not just about talking the talk, it most definitely is about walking the walk as well.
Correct. Your employees, they're not afraid to keep you accountable anymore. Before oh my God, I can't do that because he's or she is a level above me, the title, right? But now it's saying, no, I'm human just like you are. And there's a certain expectation that I have. Karen, I know in our previous conversation, we talked about, we're looking at, at this from the lens of what the employee needs. But the reality is we work at an organization and there are expectations that they have from us, correct? And so please share your thoughts that you share with me. I want you to share with them.
Yeah, I think it's so funny because, we're working so hard to retain people and help them find the right path forward, but it also has to make sense for the business as well, because by the way, that is the only way it's going to work is when it works for both people. Think about any relationship. If one person is getting something out of it and the other partner is not, it's not going to work. So whether it's talking about what are the right perks and benefits, or whether it's career development or opportunities to move forward in the organization, or how we think about remote first, or any of the things that we are working on to try to create the best culture as possible. It also has to fit for where we are as an organization, the industry we're in, the size we're in, the stage we're at. So I really try to talk a lot about the marriage of what's important to the team and what the business need is, and where those two things come together. That is magic, and that's where we need to be, but it can't be unequal on either side. And I think but I get it, right? Like a lot of times we also do not do a great job of communicating that, of tying those things together, either because we tried something and it actually worked and we want to tie it to the feedback we got, or explaining without sounding defensive about why something doesn't make sense for us. And so I think that is a place where conceptually it might make sense, but we can still do better around communication, myself included, and my whole leadership team, just as an example.
I see everyone shaking their heads. So what are your thoughts, Kavita, Zara, Chris?
One that I would share, just to mostly echo what Karen was sharing, is that there are always stakeholders that are looking for return, right? Creating shareholder value, whatever that means for your organization. That the key is parity between that value and the lives of your employees. And the one piece of advice I would give is, I think it's key in setting the proper expectations. Oftentimes, where you get the most friction is when the expectation of the business isn't properly communicated with the employees, and acknowledging that expectation will change with the life cycle of the business. As it changes, those pieces being thoughtfully communicated frequently with employees, I think is one of the best things that you can do to navigate through changing expectations between the relationship of the business and your folks.
That's such a good point. And I think a lot about that transparency and communication that employees expect. So I work at a very mission-driven company. Most people join the company because of its mission, but we have tried to be more transparent about the business. How is the business performing? What's working well? Where do we need more help? And so something we launched in the last couple of months is an internal wiki page where we're actually sharing more business metrics and trainings on how employees can understand what these metrics are, even if it might not seem like it relates to your department. And then we've also launched a metrics of the month, seminar. So employees are actually getting into it, like things like NPS, Net Promoter Score. They're like, okay, we know there's a number, we hear about it at town hall, but actually giving employees the empowerment to see the data, click around in it, ask questions, learn how it's calculated, has been pretty transformative. And now when there's a request for a new product launch or something, they understand the data better. They're like, oh, okay, we want to work on improving this before we launch the next thing. So it has helped us in aligning those, Karen, to your point, that the business decisions that you're making so that employees can understand the rationale.
I was also just going to chime in. This goes back to my earlier point about building that psychological safety and not having these types of conversations in silos or like at a specific certain time, like in your performance review, that is when we're having these conversations, right? But actually having more consistent open spaces and people feeling comfortable and safe to have these conversations outside of just those designated for that. So I think, again, like having these be integrated throughout the culture of a company is going to be crucial to actually have people not only understand what they can, what's expected of them from the company, but also like, what is the company going to offer them? And it should be a two-way street and a two-way conversation, but not having it relegated just to like performance reviews or like specific areas.
Right, right, right. So, and I hear you all talking about the importance of communication. Are there any specific, tools or approaches that you've used? Because before the pandemic, we heard a lot about communication overload, right? Everything was just being sent to us. It wasn't intentional. How have you effectively communicated? I know you talked about the metrics meeting. What are some other examples?
So one thing we've tried is to really think about, especially knowing that people might have distractions or different work schedules because of the flexibility we offer with remote work, is you get it in a couple of different channels. So we'll talk about it at a team update. We'll record that team update and then share some like the agenda and the slides and the recording of the team update. So if you need to fast forward to what you missed or what you want to see, you can do that. We have Slack channels that are very dedicated to certain things where you can go and check in on things. And then we also do follow-up meetings. So whether that is skip levels with department heads, department level follow-up. So we just had a quarterly all hands. Our CEO, COO, and the department heads meet with each of the departments to say, so what questions do you have? How does this impact your team and your department? Plus newsletters and emails from different teams. So it feels like overload when you list it all out, but everybody's grabbing different pieces of it based on what they need. When do they need to reference it? What information were they looking for? Did they miss something? Did they misunderstand something? So you said the word overload, and as I was thinking through everything, I was like, oh boy, we might do overload, but we're trying to hit people where they are versus assume how they want to have it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this goes back to that personalized approach again. Some people just learn in different ways. So it also is all about learning what people's work styles are and being able to individualize like how you're sharing out information. Obviously, company-wide, you may have a structure in place, like whether it's a Slack channel or a company-wide meeting that's happening, but also thinking about how are managers really being mindful and intentional on how they're making sure that their staff is getting the information they need. And maybe some people Slack is not the way to go. So maybe for those folks, it's emails, but it really is managers like knowing their folks well enough to be able to make sure and check in that they're getting the information in the way that they best learn.
I just had a community question come in, and I want to make sure Joyce Gray feels seen and heard. And she has a specific question, actually. So how do you balance meeting new candidates' demands versus your retaining talent demands?
I think it goes back to something Kavita said where, and then we all sort of built on it in different ways, but this is a marathon, not a sprint. So if you take care of the person walking in the door only, you are then going to lose someone who's been there for a while. And then you're just going to have to find someone else new. And it's like this vicious cycle, and you're just putting out the fire in front of you to try to deal with that situation in front of you. But if you think about it as a strategy, which will learn and which will evolve and grow, right? But if you think of more strategic around, this is what we want to offer our team for a new candidate, they're going to take advantage of that. And then we want to make sure we apply that to everyone in the organization where it makes sense. So I really like Kavita's point about like, we have to be more strategic about this, not just dealing with the thing in front of us, which might be the new candidate or the person that's threatening to quit. And so we're trying to save them. And then we just made an issue for someone else.
Right.
Yeah, I'll just add, we do think a lot about internal equity at my company. So, and that's, I think, a way to balance both, where as we bring candidates in that might have higher compensation asks, we will look at where are people internally, what's fair, how do we, make sure we have internal equity. But in terms of the engagement side of it, that new hire onboarding period, the first 90 days, the first year, especially in a remote and hybrid environment, is so critical. So something we've done is pair people with onboarding buddies, which is a way to, I think, engage the legacy employees as well as the new employees. Because when you're onboarding someone and whether it's a virtual lunch or a real lunch, and you kind of get re-excited about the company, right? You're sharing with them about like, why did you join? And, who do you like to work with and things like that. So I think that's one way we've tried to connect both, because we know both need to happen.
I was just going to say, Kavita, yeah, that's something we always talk about, is that hiring and interviewing and that process is really important. But oftentimes where companies miss the mark is that onboarding of employees. And if you're not, if you don't have a strong structure in place that's effective to keep your employees, you will lose new employees, whether it's a few months down the line or whether it's a year or two down the line. So I love that you named the onboarding piece.
I think it's hard to, it can be hard to explain or have people understand the culture when you're in a remote environment as well. The feedback I got is when the company was more fully in person, it was just easy. People organically could see it, feel it, be around it, and could understand it. But in a remote environment, it does have to be more thoughtful, more communications, more examples, and things like that. So we are revamping our onboarding process. We don't have it, we don't have it down perfectly, but we're really keeping these things in mind.
I would also name streamlining it, right? We don't want folks joining different teams, having different experiences. And it's interesting because PowerToFly has always been remote. Like before the pandemic, we've always been a global and remote company. And so it's very interesting to hear from folks like what new challenges are occurring in companies, because we definitely have been navigating that for a while. But I definitely want to name what you said about like making sure that we're streamlining a lot of the experience for folks.
I was going to answer with an analogy as a technology provider, because I think the question transcends the specific use case. It's really, really applicable broadly. In my position, we get a lot of technology feature requests from our customers, our current paying customers, and we get a lot of requests from prospective customers. And it's always a balance in where do we choose to put the investment. And I'd say fundamentally, we consider two big things. How does the request, be it prospective customer or customer, align with our mission and values? And what's the level of effort? That's a bit of a non-answer, but I think as guiding principles, kind of trying to discern, does this fundamentally align with where we want to go, and what's the level of effort to deliver, and can we make it work? Because we always want to make it work across everyone, but you can't. And starting to weigh resources with the team you have and the team you want is fundamentally how we approach product development, and the same guiding principles really allow us to navigate internal and external hiring and promotion as well.
Well said. And you actually triggered something within me to think, being okay with not having it work for everyone. And Kavita said something about, hey, it's not perfect right now. It's okay if it's not perfect. We're looking at your intentions and the impact that you're making within your organization. So with that, I want to say thank you so much for sticking with us throughout this time. We are going to launch a quick poll, and we would love to know who you would like to connect with over this time. Do not leave us yet. We will be closing it out with some really good information that you don't want to miss. So please let us know, who would you like to connect with after the webinar? Thank you for sharing who you would like to connect with. Now, I want to leave you with this last question from me to our panelists. What happens when culture and strategy finds alignment for the future? And I know, Chris, you kind of alluded to that earlier. So I would love to start with you on your thoughts of what happens when culture and strategy finds alignment, or even marry with one another.
I come back to a word I used earlier, which is that symmetry. And I think if you really do that well, you can start to see symmetry between the traditional business outcomes, revenue and margin, with really people-centric metrics, be it employee satisfaction, retention, but then I go further into things like health and wellness. And when you can really start to look at the two of those as parity, that's when you've done it right. But it's a journey. You're sailing to a port you'll never really reach, but keep sailing, right? The goal is to get a little closer every day.
Yeah, I would just chime in and build off of that. If you're very intentional around your culture and strategy, you're going to have happier employees, and you're gonna keep them, and your business is going to continue to thrive and grow. And so it really is about elevating the sense of belonging, the connection that's happening for employees, for them to feel very happy, to feel like their needs are being met, and to stay.
I would tie it to something someone else said earlier around employees are making choices of where they work because they want to feel connected like the work means something, then now that may mean something to everybody. That means something different to everybody. But when culture and strategy come together, to me, that means that they're seeing both at the same time. I understand the value of the business and I understand the value of me being here and the impact that I can have. And I feel like my company is giving that back to me. So it's really like that diagram of all of it coming together in the right place, and you'll retain the right people. I think the other thing that I would just sort of share as a parting thought is it's also okay if your company is not the right place for everybody for every hour of every day. So if someone does move on, that's okay, but celebrate them, thank them for the time that they've been there, the value that they've added. Good luck with the next thing. And it's good to have new people and healthy for people to come and go. So it's also okay if you don't retain everybody.
I'll just add, employees at all levels will have so much more clarity. So it'll help with the speed and quality of decision making, which, like all the other panelists said, will help have happier employees, better business results. So it is, I think all of us are striving for this, for the culture and strategy alignment, and hopefully getting closer and closer to it.
Yes. So thank you, everyone. Yes, thank you, Stephanie, for sharing your LinkedIn. Be sure to connect with all of these thought leaders as well as the organizations here. We really do appreciate your time that you've shared with us, as well as the wisdom that you've shared in the chat. And we want to tell you to continue to go out and be great in all that you do. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you all.
Thank you guys. Such a great job. Thank you.